I did an amateur track day event in my Genesis G70, and in this video, I wanted to share my experience with how the car performed. I also want to go over everything you should be aware of if you are considering taking your G70 on the track. The main issue you are likely to run into with this car is the transmission overheating. Other than that, you should not have any issues, but I'm going to speak to all that later in the video, so be sure and stick around. Alright, now before I get into the details of how well the car performed, I did want to provide some context in regards to the track I was on and how the event was run that I attended. So the event I attended was an amateur track day session where they let cars out one at a time, typically spaced at like 30-second intervals, and there is no passing allowed. After you complete each lap, you then exit the track and you get back in pit lane to line up to do another run. The course I was on took about 3 minutes per lap to complete and was a short circuit style course. The straightaways never allowed you to get faster than 70, 80 miles an hour, and during my 1 hour session, I was able to complete around 5 to 6 laps. And I did each of those laps with traction control and stability control fully turned off. Although I do not recommend turning traction control fully off because this car is super squirrely and just wants to spin out like crazy. I'll talk to more of that later. Now, I also wanted to mention that if you really wanted to get your G70 out on the track, but you're afraid to because you don't want to blow through a set of tires and brakes, if you do one of these amateur track events like I did, I can promise you, you're not going to destroy your tires and you're not going to destroy your brakes. I took my car to a mechanic after doing this just to see how much damage I had caused to the tires and brakes, and they said my brake pads still looked brand new and my tire tread is still perfectly fine. So like I said, if you're wanting to get your car on the track and fully experience this vehicle, don't let the fear of having to replace your tires and brakes afterwards scare you away, because doing a simple event like this, it's not going to put that much damage or wear and tear on your tires and brake pads. Okay, so now that I've given some context in regards to the track I was on and how the event was run, the first thing I wanted to talk about in terms of how the car performed is that the stock Michelin tires on the 3.3 all-wheel drive were a major limiting factor for this car. So if you plan on doing anything beyond a beginner track day session and you want to get into more serious track day events, you're going to 100% want to get better tires, because although these tires drive great on the road and they're fun on back roads, if you push this car to the limit on the track, you will learn very quickly just how incapable they are. And going off of that, I wanted to speak to how this car handles, because something super interesting about the G70 is that if you turn the stability and traction control fully off, although this car is all-wheel drive, the version of my car is all-wheel drive, it becomes fully rear-wheel drive, or at least that's how it seemed to drive. I had a very hard time keeping the rear end under control coming out of every single turn and every single corner. And as you can even see in this short little clip right here, I lost the back end slightly coming out of this one corner. But luckily, I put hundreds of hours into sim racing games. I'm basically an expert driver, so that's what saved me there, you know. Anyway, the next thing I wanted to share about this track experience is that the power delivery in Sport Plus mode was just absolutely flawless and perfect. There is zero turbo lag, instant power delivery just all the time. You would have thought you were driving an electric car because of how instant the power delivery was and how consistent the power band was as well. Now, I did do a lap in the normal sport mode to see how it changed the driving dynamic, and I gotta say it absolutely sucked because it doesn't hold the gears and it doesn't keep it in the right power band. So if you ever take your G70 on the track one day, I do not recommend driving it in any other mode other than the Sport Plus mode, because it's gonna be super boring and super underwhelming. Genesis even says in their marketing material that Sport Plus mode is for at the limits driving on the racetrack. So essentially Sport Plus mode on this car equals track mode. And if you're driving on the track in this car and you're not driving it in track mode, it's going to suck and be a terrible experience. Now, going off the whole powertrain discussion, the next thing I wanted to talk about was the engine cooling, if I experienced any brake fading, and if there were any issues with the transmission overheating. So a quick answer to all that is that I had zero overheating issues with anything. I had no issues with the transmission either. Now, this was probably due to the fact that because of the way the course was, you never really were able to get faster than like 70, 80 miles an hour. On top of that, it was a very short track. It was only 60 degrees outside, so it was a very lovely temperature. And then the line to get back onto the track typically took about 3 to 5 minutes, which I'm also sure allowed things to cool back down in between each lap. Now, I did notice my engine oil temperature get up to around the 230 range after doing like 3 consecutive laps back to back. And that's the highest I've ever seen my oil go. So I was like, oh, I'll probably just pull over and let the car cool off for a little bit. So I just parked and let the car idle for about 5 minutes. Literally within 5 minutes, it cooled back down to that 200 range, which is typically about the average operating temperature I see when I'm just driving around the city. Now, it is worth noting that if you were to take this car on a full track like Mid-Ohio or Barber Motorsports Park, some other courses like that, you might run into more cooling issues, especially the transmission thing, which I read is really the main problem with this car on the track is the transmission overheating. But like I said, because the course I was on, I likely didn't experience any of that because of all the factors I mentioned. So if you were to take your car on one of those larger tracks like that, just be aware of potential cooling issues you might run into. Now, speaking to the brakes, I did not notice any brake fade whatsoever. Granted, there were only about 2 to 3 turns that required you to get really heavy into the brakes. So I think because of the course I was on, and you're not getting above like 70, 80 miles an hour, likely contributed to very little brake pad wear and very little brake heat buildup. Now, I did want to say the stock brakes on this car are very impressive. I went flying into a blind turn at about 70 miles an hour and had to really get heavy into the brakes, and trust me when I say they will stop on a dime. So if you've got the Brembos on the 3.3 Sport Prestige all-wheel drive, they are very impressive brakes. Now, I did want to speak briefly to the tire pressure and what you should set your tire PSI at when starting your laps. And it's really all going to come down to the exact tires on your car. But what I will say is that based off my 6-7 laps that I completed, I only noticed my tire pressure go up by about 2 to 3 PSI. So because of that, I recommend that when you start your laps, just drop it below about 2-3 PSI below the normal operating pressure range, and then just monitor it as you complete your laps. And if it starts to get too high, just drop them. Super easy to do. Overall, I was blown away by the performance of my G70 on the track. I knew it was going to be fun because on the road, it's plenty of fun and it's almost too much power for the streets. That's the main reason I wanted to get onto the track, was to be able to fully experience the potential and power of this car. And all I got to say is the German cars don't know what they have coming for them once Genesis starts releasing their Magma Performance line. So to wrap this up, if I were to make any improvements to this car to better prepare it for a more intense track day and a more long-term track day, I would definitely upgrade the tires, as like I said, that was a huge limiting factor on this car. Didn't have hardly any grip coming out of the corners, and there was plenty of times where I had a lot of understeer. The tires are not well equipped for this car on the track and with how much power it has. Another thing I would do is definitely put sway bars on it to help with the body roll and stiffen it up a bit more, because this car does have a bit more body roll than I would prefer. And then last thing you should probably do, and what I was recommended to do for longer track days, is upgrade the brake fluid, upgrade the transmission fluid, and potentially also even upgrade the brake pads to be a more longer endurance brake pad. So other than those few small changes, this car is pretty much already track ready. And like I said, if you're considering doing an amateur track day like myself, it's 1 hour, you're doing 5 to 6 laps. I don't think you need to mod anything on this car whatsoever. It's going to hold up perfectly fine, and it's going to perform great. Just be a little cautious though. If you're running the stock tires and you've got traction control and stability fully off, it is going to be super squirrely on the rear of this vehicle. So if you guys have any further questions or comments about the car, be sure and leave a comment below. I'm also curious to hear if anyone else watching this video has done a track day experience in their car and what their experience was like. So be sure and subscribe for more G70 content like this in the future. And with that, guys, thanks for watching, and don't forget, stay glousy.